I want to introduce you today to Bill Hart-Davidson. Bill and I graduated from our respective PhD programs at the same time. A couple of years later, we ran into each other at a conference, got talking, realized we had a lot of similarities, similar interests. At that time, we wanted to model document-mediated interaction. Everybody got quiet when I said that. So, but ever since then, we've spent a lot of time together. We've collaborated on a lot of different papers. I've asked Bill to blurb my books. I've fanatically watched Bill's work with Eli Review as he's built it into a really interesting, really productive system. I'm just really glad to have him here today. Not only is he a fantastic person, as you guys already know, if you've met him, he's a fantastic scholar, and he's full of ideas, some of which he's going to share with us today. Thank you so much for coming, Bill.
Well, I want to thank everybody for having me and all the folks. I've had great conversations the last few days. And that's one of the nice things about these trips is we get to learn as much as we can in a short amount of time. And there's way more of you than me. So I get to be the beneficiary of that equation, so I appreciate it. As Clay said, we've been working together a long time, and I actually want to start that way. I want to talk a little bit about the role that this place and Clay and the kind of work we were doing together had in coming up with and launching the idea for Eli to begin with. So first of all, yesterday I got to see the DWRL, and there was a pretty well-known book that chronicled a lot of the early years of the DWRL when they were down in the basement building a system called Daedalus that you all might have. Some of you remember it, some of you remember using maybe. Others it's consigned to history because it was a local area networking program before the World Wide Web existed to let students share information in real time, chat, and comment back and forth on each other's papers, all before we had anything but these big fax computers to do that. And now, of course, it's almost inconceivable that we would need to make something special to do that. But that was a bunch of grad students and some brave faculty members letting the grad students do some cool stuff, building writing software. And out of that was a book called Writing Teachers, Writing Software that told some of that story. And I read that book and thought, you can do that? Mm-hmm. That's cool. And so that's, in a nutshell, has been my career. I've been a writing teacher, writing software, to try to help writers and to try to help other people who might benefit from knowing the things we know or being able to put those things that we know into practice. So that's one origin story. The other one is a little bit more closer in time, and that's the kind of work that Clay and I had in common. And also my colleague Jeff Grable, who's another inventor of Eli. We were working at our version of the DWRL at Michigan State called WIDE. At the time we parsed WIDE as Writing and Digital Environments Research Center. In our 12-year anniversary, we rebranded, and we're now Writing, Information, and Digital Experience. But we kept the WIDE name, which was pretty clever. So we had our KFC moment, I like it. And we were studying how people learn to write throughout their whole career. So we became interested in those moments of how people gain proficiency, learn new genres, cope with the way technology is changing the demands on them as writers once they leave our classrooms. And we were interested in that for a number of reasons. Some, I guess, purely research-oriented reasons, but other very pragmatic. We wanted to know what world we were preparing our students for. So during the time that Clay was directing the DWRL, you might have seen some of the fruits of that work. One was a white paper that I still see cited quite a lot by people doing curricular work called "What Do We Have to Teach Students to Be Effective Knowledge Workers?" And we were thinking about, well, they may be working now not all in the same place, and yet they have to coordinate. So what does that involve? We were thinking about those kinds of problems. Here's a little picture of that. Oh, now the last one. So I like this is a humbling moment, but we think about, like, how long do we spend in our lives learning writing? The vast majority of of that arc is not in formal learning moments. So there's first year writing. They're informal, right? And thanks to some other research by some folks that we think highly of, Jason wrote a book called Together with Technology. We were looking at and asking questions about, well, how do people do that? Turns out the most important way is by peer feedback. That is, people on the job and writing to someone that they trust, and they say, will you look at this? And sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it doesn't go well. But that's one of those worlds that we are preparing our students for kinds of thing. It's also a key differentiator. Jason makes this argument really well, but it's also made in a few other well-known books in the field, one called Worlds Apart by Medway, Diaz, and Aviva Friedman. And they talk about the ability to give good feedback, but also to use feedback effectively to make changes is a differentiator for career success. And so these are writing skills beyond the entry-level moment of someone's career. They really define a set of professional skills that go beyond that. Now I spoiled my surprise, but I want you to think about this picture in your head, the one that you already got a peek of. So what does that look like is what I want to ask. So let's imagine that that's the world of writing that we want to prepare people for. What does learning and writing look like? And this is the picture, or one like it, that I like to show people. So I say it looks a little something like this, although it's usually less graceful. And that is, it looks like people learning from one another. So if you look at the faces here, you see something close to what we've come to call peer scaffolding. You see one person who seems to maybe be looking after the others, and then the others are looking to that person at various levels of independence to kind of understand where they're supposed to be. And this is an idea that comes to us from Vygotsky, called the zone of proximal development. It's a fancy name for we can learn more efficiently, more effectively, maybe in groups of our peers, especially where there are more capable peers available to us, than we can by struggling by ourselves to learn the same thing. And so there are lots of areas of practice where this is routinely put into play, and it's understood to be the most effective way to learn. Dancing is one of them. That's why you learn dancing in a studio. And it's also why we learn writing in a studio, by the way. So you can get moments like this one. So what I want to say about the zone of proximal development and peer scaffolding is that we sometimes imagine this more capable peer relationship as, I think, too hierarchical than it was intended in the theory. These are moments that happen over time, and they aren't permanent stances. It isn't the case that we always look to one more capable peer. It's that one measure for one part of the song, I might have those steps down, and so I'm out there and I'm focused on the crowd, and Casey is going, what are we supposed to be doing? And then the next minute, I look to Casey as like, oh, now I'm off on the wrong foot, and I need a little help. So we've all had our moments in those two sections. And then there's that person off stage there. So you see the eyeball, even the one who's on the right motion, look where her eyes are. There's probably a coach going, that's you, right? That's the teacher in a writing class. And so one of the things that we started to realize about Eli, in terms of the need for Eli, is we needed a more studio-like environment where we could have a feedback-rich culture with the ability to have that intervening coach when it was needed. And we didn't only need that for our first year writing or for our professional writing courses. We needed to help students learn how to do that for one another, because giving and receiving good feedback was the essence of learning how to be a good writer over the course of their lives. And so we've actually made a radical shift in that direction now at our institution, certainly in our program, to thinking about what's the most valuable thing that we do when we're together face to face. Is it practice a particular segment of the dance? Or is it practicing how to learn all the dances, to learn the next dance? Because the interesting thing about the challenges that come up is that this analogy starts to fall apart a little bit. Because unlike a dance studio, we have some challenges that a dance teacher doesn't have, right? So take a look at this picture. Here's a big writing class. Hopefully yours isn't as big. Here's some questions. So, which students were writing? We could see that, maybe. They might be drawing, they might be doing something else. Which students are addressing the key criteria in their writing? Which students are on the right foot? Which students are offering feedback to a peer, as opposed to just chatting? Which are offering feedback aligned with your learning goals, so offering good feedback as opposed to questionable feedback? Who's struggling to understand? Who's on the wrong foot? Who needs help? Who's revising? Who's doing one of the more quality things you want them all to be doing? And who's really just struggling to get something on the page to begin with? And who's stuck and can't quite see how to revise? So if you look again, there's very little in the environment that's helpful. And that was a visibility problem that we thought technology could solve. So, welcome to Eli. So Eli makes your writing class like a dance studio. The moves become more visible. And they become visible not only in the text that students write, but in the way that they're giving feedback to each other. So that the bits of meta-discourse, the way they're talking about writing to one another, become open to you as a way to create and evaluate an intervention. And I'm going to show you some examples of that because it's a little easier to talk through that. But this will make instant sense to you. I can often learn more about whether my students are understanding, especially early on in a drafting cycle, by watching the feedback they give each other than I can from their own draft. And that's because they may be coaching the wrong thing, and so then that's probably not going to show up in their own draft well. Or it's far more likely the other way around. They may know what they think I need or what the project needs, but they're not quite there in their own draft yet, for whatever reason. They haven't made that connection. Some of you will recognize that even when you're quite experienced writers. Like, I know where I need to get, but I can't quite see what the way to get there is. Right? That's part of learning from feedback as well. So I've talked a little bit about feedback, but I wanted to, before I show you the way Eli works in the classroom, I really want to take some time with all of you to do something I don't always get to do, which is talk about the evidence. Because you might still not believe me, and that would be okay, that feedback is such an important driver. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So believe it or not, we've had actually some really high quality meta-analyses of writing, done by people not generally in our field. They're in educational psychology for the most part, but they're interested in learning to write, literacy at all levels. And they have done some good work for us in that they've looked at what are the most effective interventions, what are the things that teachers can ask students to do that seem to drive learning the most. And so I'm going to try to build this with you for a little bit. The framework that's offered by this pair, Kellogg and Whiteford, 2009, is a framework that will be familiar with you from situations like dance class, sports, other kinds of things. And that is deliberate practice. So what they mean by deliberate practice is really short sessions in which the goal of the learning is well understood and adopted by the learner. So everybody has to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and they have to sort of be on board with it. That's all they mean by deliberate practice. So we're going to kick this ball, not so that we learn all of soccer, but because we're trying to learn how to do a particular kind of pass. And we're going to do it 20 times. Within the framework of deliberate practice, then, two dynamics lead to better performance. One is it should be guided by experts. That's the coach role or the teacher role. They're the ones who set the parameters for the practice session, maybe teach a few key mechanics, and then scaffolded by peers. And so they're the ones who provide most, if not all, of the feedback in the situation. And a lot of that feedback is passive, what the Kellogg and Whiteford and some others call peer calibration. It's just that moment where you go, am I doing this? Okay, is this what we're doing? We're doing this? Okay, we're doing this. That kind of stuff. Doing it over and over just to see if that's what you're doing. Even that is very challenging in that classroom environment that I talked about, because writing happens here and here a lot. It's hard to see, for students to see, if what they're attempting to do is what everyone else understands to be what we're attempting to do. But that alone is a powerful driver. The other thing that's true is something that will ring true if you're a parent. That is, they believe the peers more. They will do what they hear from peers more than they will from the experts, whether it's good or bad. Right, so I'll come back to that. All right, so then deliberate practice. Let's imagine that you accept that premise. Okay, yeah, my class is set up around deliberate practice. So, but there are different ways to practice writing. So what works there? Well, there's some evidence there too. Keep advancing faster. Graham and Perrin, a little bit earlier than the previous one, did this meta-analysis. It's quite large. I think there are something like 77 effect sizes, different studies that are in the meta-analysis. And what they did is they looked at classroom activity, and they said they did all the kind of normalizing behavior that you do when you do a meta-analysis to try to account for the strength of the available evidence. Is the N big enough, etc. And they said, all right, here's what it looks like you could get the most bang for your buck out of in terms of spending time in the right environment. By far, the one that stood out is revision focused on higher order concerns. The more time spent on that, the better the outcomes later. Now the problem with that is, and there are a couple of other things they say, more of that is better. More often is better, so frequency and total volume. But intermittent or inconsistent practice of that is bad, because there are a lot of things lost in between. So they really have to spend a lot of time doing it, and doing it relatively recently. Now again, if you're okay with these exercise metaphors that I've been promising, or dance class, or yoga if you prefer, you know that this is relatively true for that as well. If you practice once every month, it's not as good as if you practice 10 minutes a day every day. But for all of that to be true, and for revision focused on higher order concerns to actually guide focus on higher order versus lower order concerns, the feedback has to be really good. Because students don't always gravitate towards the hardest changes. They don't always think to rearrange their argument based on the strength of their evidence unless they're guided to do so. And even if you tell them to do that, it may not be obvious how to do that. So good feedback is really a key there. So this is all the evidence that was staring us in the face when we made Eli. So Jeff and I literally poured over all of this stuff, and we said, if we're going to make a big difference in the outcomes, we should pay attention to what people say works. They need more time spent writing in a particular way, which is revising based on higher order concerns, with the guidance of good feedback. And in order to do that, we have to teach good feedback, because we can't provide it all. Even if we could provide it all, they would rather listen to their peers than us. And so, this is the environment out of which Eli came. So, I'll show you then that what I just said in that Go messaging that I showed. So, this is what my class used to look like, time-wise, and even a typical assignment. Say 2 weeks, assign a paper. And we were trying to get because that's the zone of proximal development, right? That's where you see each other's work, you're calibrating, you're giving feedback, you're seeing getting guidance from a more capable people. It all starts to make a little sense. But that's a very different pattern than we were teaching with before Eli, because it's really hard with the time and space constraints to get there. It means that I had to do lots more reviewing and lots more revising work, particularly planning higher order concerns cases. All right, so I have you so far. You see where the challenges lie? All right, so now I'm going to show you what it looks like in Eli. I'm going to switch, and I'm going to show you what my class looks like these days. This is actually an older class. And the first thing I'm going to show you is a review activity in Eli. And I'll point out a couple of ways my own teaching has changed and the evidence that comes from that. And then I'll zoom out and show you how the whole class looks a little bit different. This is a view I don't ever start out with, so I apologize for throwing you right into the middle. This is in a tech writing class where we're working on a set of not particular genres, but moves that are important to writing a lot of different kinds of technical writing genres. In this one, we're working on reporting generally, and we're looking at making an argument. So I chose this one because I thought it has a lot of overlap with other kinds of writing. And the way I teach making an argument here is pretty consistent with how I would teach it in an academic writing course or any other thing. Here I had some things that I was really focusing on that I wanted them to practice. And so when we talk about deliberate practice, these are the kind of things I would be cueing and that I would have taught earlier on. They show up in Eli as traits that everyone is looking to identify in each other's drafts. And I have this is a done review, it's cooked, and so I can see where students identified as a whole class average these traits existed. What I was happy to see is that everyone seems to be finding claims of fact in everyone else's. Those are the easiest ones to make, though. Claims of value probably are a little out of bounds in most technical writing genres. We talked a little bit about that, but we wanted those to show up. Moving down the list, we can see the more challenging moves, the ones that I expected to be less commonly there, and they are there. My suspicions are confirmed here. Only 84% of people identified evidence that went along with claims. That was a concern. And you can see down the line we were following more or less a Toolman model. So this is deliberate practice from the point of view of a review. And what I'm seeing here is a couple of layered things. And I'll show you how I drill down into that in just a second. But the interesting thing here is to look at how the piece of writing that was feeding this and what else I have access to. So here I'm seeing a random selection of the comments that they make to each other. And I chose this one so that you could see a kind of an example of how seeing this it can be as effective an indicator as anything else. So if I look at classmate 18 to classmate 17 in the middle here, you can see that that person, I think it's a she. that person understands what we're trying to do. So here's what I can do now. I can go to classmate 18 and see all the things that that person said. These are all the comments that person made. And I can also flip over and see that person as a writer. So let's find 18. Would you expect that person to be a good writer? I would. Let's see. Yeah, except that she has two priorities here. I'm comparing her to the class average and just in the traits note. And you can see that she has two areas that her reviewers don't see showing up. And I also noticed this, right? So she's got the basic claims and evidence down, and she's clearly ready to move on. And these are her challenges. And so this is what I want to see showing up in the next phase, which is her revision plan. In Eli, the way the deliberate practice cycle works is write, review, revise. So we don't try to overcomplicate things. As a teacher, what I do is I assign a small piece of writing. It's usually part of something else that we're already writing. But they turn in just a piece of it. That gets reviewed, and then they build a revision plan based on the feedback that they get. The revision plan and the review itself are indicators for me. I take all of that, the draft, the revision plan, and the review, all together. And that's after I have all of those pieces, and then I give my feedback. And so what it does is it changes the dynamic that I have with individual students, but also with the whole class. So I came into this class session knowing that those 75% areas were going to take up most of the time, because that's where we needed to focus. I also say specific things to classmate number 18. I say, you're doing great with the basics. You got them down. Now it's time to get this warrant thing. Were you like me? You didn't understand really what warrant meant? Because it took me years to figure that out. Let's talk about that. And it turns out we don't always need a warrant. But when you need one, you really need one, because your audience needs to understand why this piece of evidence is really related to this claim. How we can link those two things together. That's really what we're talking about. So we call this, what I just am modeling for you, evidence-based teaching. But I think about it as what the coach does or what the dance teacher does. Because now I've transformed my class a bit into a bit of a dance studio. So I know that she's got step ball change down. So when we're working on that, she's my model. I'll call her up to the class. I'll say, Zoe, will you do a step ball change for everybody, please? Now watch where her hand position are, people. I know you know the feet, but watch her hand. Look at her top line. Look at that. Great job, Zoe. I send her back. Now when we do warrants, which is the next 8 bars, I know that she's not the one to watch for the whole class, but I have someone else, right? And so that's what my class looks like day to day to day to day. So now, you ready for the big picture? I didn't want to, it just tends to freak people out a little bit, but now you know how it goes. Because it looks a little different. So it's write, review, revise, write, review, revise, write, review, revise. Lots and lots of little cycles. Now we built some things to help people make sense of that. So I'm going to show you some of the graphs here. This is good news. So each dot is every review we did. We did 14 reviews that semester, 4 projects. So think of how many times your students review and revise the things that you assign. betting that's not 14, but it should be. That's what the evidence says. What this little graph shows me, in addition to all of that, is I'm achieving a pretty good ratio of engagement where every comment someone gives, they get one back. So I don't have a lot of lopsided reviews. So this is the other thing that I can see that I didn't have a lot of confidence in when I used to do peer review the old way. That everyone was getting as good as they got. I have a lot more confidence in that now, not only because of displays like this, but because I can drill down and see what the words say. I'll show you one more thing and then I'm going to switch. Because I have this view for everybody. So I'll show you. So now I see this person with reference to the bottom 30, the class average, and the top 30. Now what's useful about this for me is that here you're seeing it when it's all over, and we see that this particular student's a good student, right? I can see the struggling students right away, well before this. Well before they're done with the first paper, in time to tap them on the shoulder and say, something's up. We need to talk. I can see that even if it's an online course now. When before, it's sending email out into the void and then you don't hear anything and you're like, is that person still alive? But that's true in a face-to-face class too, if you're not careful. All right, so that's what Eli is. Thank you for jumping in the deep end of the pool with me. This is for Clay. We were building these kinds of diagrams in workplaces. We were trying to watch how documents mediated social action. In particular, we were watching how they were doing things that mattered to knowledge workers. And in this case, I think that's what we're still doing, except what matters is learning, right? So what are the things that Eli does for you? Why do we look different than other systems? So in Eli, the teacher plays the role of a task coordinator, and then writers and reviewers are student roles that toggle back and forth. And so this is how information moves through. And this is why you can't quite do what we do in Eli with any other system. If you think about in Word or in Google Docs, comments are part of a document. They're metadata on a document. And so if you're doing it in Word and you wanted to do the aggregating work that we do, or if you just wanted to read the comments, you have to read a bunch of different ones to figure out who's saying what to do. In Google Docs, it's a little better because there's a shared environment, but it gets really messy really fast. Here we do all that stuff, and because we've engineered it this way with a role-based approach, we produce all those reports out. That's where the evidence comes from. The students see a simplified version of that same report, by the way, and they build their revision plan straight from there. They drag all the comments over that they want to use, and then they edit that, and they say, here are my priorities. They can rearrange it and leave their own comments, and then you can respond back to that. You can endorse the comments. You can say, I like this, this is good advice, you should listen to this advice. So you have some options, and all of that is because we really took a lot of what we learned in workplace settings and built it into this kind of system. The data in Eli is not cooked very much. There are a few exceptions. This is one of them. But what I mean by that is we are really trying to return all the evidence to you as the expert in the room. So what we do is gather and aggregate. We do some arithmetic, and then we report out. And we present it back to you to make sense of. Most of the other systems, and especially the ones as we lean more towards automated grading systems, are really looking to evaluate the evidence that they see from a written text, where the text is assumed to be the thing that has all the indicators of learning in it. You'll notice that I don't actually think that's where the more interesting moves are. I thought that before Eli, I think that now. I think the moves that they make to get eventually into the text there are earlier indicators there, and we can catch those if we're careful. And so we would rather give that information back to teachers and let them think about it both at a group level and an individual level, and that's what Eli does. As a result, the core activity in Eli for teachers is building that review template, really, the thing that the students use to guide their feedback with one another. I say that because the writing piece is usually whatever you've already assigned. So anything you're going to assign is going to work, whether that's a website or a PowerPoint or whatever. But the learning indicators, as they correspond with what you want students to figure out, that all lives in the review. And so setting the parameters of their deliberate practice really happens there. And then they act on that in a couple of different ways. One, of course, is by giving each other feedback. The other is by using the feedback they receive and showing you how they intend to use it to revise. You have a plan in place. What it adds up to, hopefully, is you have indicators of where to intervene. So I started off by making this analogy of dance class. It's really more like a yoga class. And that's because we're not trying to get everybody to dance the same number. We're really trying to refine their practice. And everyone comes in with limitations and goals that are slightly different. And if you take, I'm in Austin, so heaven knows, I know you know this all about you that day. It's really all about you and what does my yoga teacher say? You feel free to say that pose is not available to me. Yeah, none of this is available. And we talk a little bit, I mention that because we talk a lot about a trend in online or digital educational technology is getting to personalized learning. I don't think personalized learning will ever work in writing because I think we learn from writing. We learn writing from one another. But I think you can get to individualized coaching. And that's what I was trying to demonstrate with classmate 18, is I can pick out what she's good at and what she still needs to work on and really challenge her to work on the next thing. And then she can tell me, yeah, that's not available to me. The other thing that is cool about Eli, because we're at the end of the day we're writing teachers, that it's full of words. Eli now has about 58,000 active student accounts. Those are people who created and submitted an assignment in the last 3 months. That adds up to more than 500,000 student responses, pieces of student writing. 1.3 million comments on that writing, about 38 million words worth of meta discourse. You get all that back. So I made this word cloud out of one assignment, and this is the feedback they were giving to each other. And I said, here's what you say to each other. Here's what you all are talking about. What do you see there? And this is kind of a fun exercise, but you can also submit that to more rigorous kinds of analysis if you so choose. All that data is available in a downloaded format too, so you can get a CSV, and all the numerical data is with it. So you can crunch it in different ways. You can also use it to do some other cool stuff, and I'll kind of close with where we're headed next. This was where I was going to tell you all the places. We also have a couple more stats. We have 1,000 unique instructors now in Eli, and we hit 200 institutions of higher education and about 40 K-12 schools. including ones all around the globe. We're in almost every time zone, except for a few of the ones where it's mostly ocean. But we have some there, it turns out. There's someone at the College of the Marshall Islands using it right now. So now I'm going to show you another project and show you where we're headed next. We can't keep our hands off all that data. And Eli comes from research that we did a decade ago. So you might be wondering, well, what are you working on today? So I also like to tell this story about Eli. You know how in science labs they always say practical applications are 10 years away? It was really true. We did that research at Y 10 years ago or more, and today we have the practical value. So what do we have today? We're trying to speed that up. So I will show you something that Casey helped us with actually. This is a resource that we built called the Hedge-O-Matic. It uses some machine learning technologies to find what I think we're trying to do in this kind of pedagogy, which is help people isolate tricky rhetorical moves and understand where they aren't executing those moves, and then help them practice them. As the name kind of cleverly makes a pun on the Hedge-O-Matic, the Hedge-O-Matic looks for moments in writing when you qualify a claim based on the strength of your evidence, particularly propositional hedges in a kind of deliberative or policy argument. Science writing in particular it's a signature or must-have kind of move. If you follow the work of John Swales, for example, you'll have read a lot. There's been a lot of scholarship about hedging, because as a rhetorical gesture, a hedge is required to be recognized as doing that thing that scientists do. So if you are talking about the same topic, let's say climate change, and you're failing to hedge appropriately, you could make all the same arguments, and you won't be recognized as doing science. You'll be doing something else. You'll be doing politics, right? So when we talk to people who are helping students learn science writing, hedging is one of those challenges for them, is helping them to understand that this is an important thing. It's not optional, and it's subtle. It varies slightly depending on the context. There are moments in a scientific text, like let's say the standard scientific article, where you're supposed to have hedging, and then there are moments where you're not supposed to have hedging. You don't want to hedge in the methods section, because that's where you say what you did, right? Like, we kind of did this. No, it's bad. But you do want to hedge in the results section and all that sort of thing. So the Hedge-O-Matic is a tool that you paste text into, and it finds the hedges. And it finds them. I can talk to you about the research results and how we made it, but it finds them about as well as two human raters agree when they're sitting together among them. A little bit less well, but not too bad. And it produces output that looks like this. So I put in a real example. So this is from a genre called a Cochrane review. The Cochrane Collaboration is a nonprofit organization dedicated to evidence-based practice in medicine. And they review a bunch of studies. They produce a report for practitioners, for clinicians, that says, here's what you should do based on the evidence with patients who have this or that condition. They spend a lot of time on a section in that area called a plain language summary, meant for people who are not scientists day to day, have scientific training, but are largely clinicians. And it has to get the hedging exactly right. So what I'll ask you to think about whether or not it is advisable to have your 14-year-old vaccinated for HPV. There's a lot of misconception around the evidence, and there are moments when hedging, even a little bit, is bad, and then there are moments when hedging is a must, it's appropriate. And so, it's very tricky. So I pasted a plain language summary in there, and we get two kinds of feedback from the Hedge-O-Matic. One is, it takes all the sentences, and it evaluates each one, and it says it has a hedge in there, or it doesn't. And then it gives us that back in a distribution. I'll come back to that in a second. That's the dots. You can see that there are only 2 hedges here. And it also gives us a readout. Now this is real. I'm very proud of this one. I'll show you why. Because the humans had trouble finding this, but it found it. So look at number 2. Now the nice thing about that is that it doesn't have a lot of some of the other qualities, the linguistic items, the lexicals that we associate with hedges, like modal verbs, might, may, right? It has an is. It also has a relatively straightforward clause structure, which is another hedge indicator, where you have embedded clauses or things like that. This one is a pretty straightforward. It is passive voice, kind of. Here is an unnamed. There is, right? But there's one little term there. Look, there's low quality evidence that decision aids improve congruence between the chosen option and the patient's value. So, what is this good for? Are we trying to get rid of human peer reviewers? Absolutely not. What we're trying to do is something that Evita and a team of her researchers were thinking a lot about, and we were inspired by. And that is imagining how these things get taken up as a gesture, as a very important rhetorical gesture, and handing back to this team of writers, here's where a reader might see a hedge. Is this what you want to do? If you look at the second hedge, that one, I don't think they want to hedge that phrase. And it may or may not be, it's a light, it's not deeply qualified in any way. But what it says is, you could say this more directly. The other thing that it does is confirm. Even when the evidence is mixed, look at number 4. That's a good one. They would have sweated over that, of how exactly to say that. There's a variable effect of decision aids on mental consultation. It's very clear. So it's a very tricky exercise for what they're trying to do. And what we're trying to do with the hedge-o-matic is something that we think eventually we will move toward in Eli, which is how to help students and folks who don't necessarily have a lot of rhetorical training the way we do, some of us and most of us maybe. How do we export that in a way that makes it useful as part of a feedback loop, so that it becomes another resource for writers, both in the classroom and well beyond the classroom, as they continue to learn how to write. So that's where we're headed next. Happy to answer any questions that you might have about any of the stuff. I threw a lot at you. I apologize for that. But I wanted to leave plenty of time so that we could talk about other stuff.